It's all in your head. You don't look sick. Your tests are normal. It's probably anxiety. There's nothing wrong with you. Have you heard these words from physicians, family, and friends? If you're someone who has been struggling and swirling through the revolving door of healthcare to find answers about your health, or if you know someone who is going through this experience, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast with Laura Nozica, a show dedicated to exploring the challenges of living with undiagnosed or rare medical conditions. This podcast explores both sides of the bedside. We will be speaking with patients who have had challenges with finding a diagnosis, along with experts in the field. I'm your host, Laura Nozica. Please note I am not a medical professional, nor am I affiliated with any healthcare, pharmaceutical, or device company. I am an entrepreneur, and I am an independent market researcher focused on helping healthcare organizations better understand the patient perspective. The podcast is not meant to offer medical advice, but to merely share the stories and perspectives of podcast guests. Hello, and welcome to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. I am your host, Laura Nozica. I'd like to welcome all of you today, but I more importantly would like to welcome our guest, who is Matt Ciciretti, who is not only a stellar guy, in my opinion, but a super dad. And he's here today to talk with us about his journey with his son. Matt, thanks for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Laura. Great to be here. And like I said privately, I love the concept and topic for this podcast. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. And I am thrilled to be learning more about you and your son's journey. Tell us a little bit about you first, because I know you have a house full and you have a lot going on, which is what makes you super dad. So tell me about being super dad.
Well, thanks. Yes. So I have 5 kids total, 3 stepkids and two from a previous marriage. And we have our daughter who's 18 in college. We have our son who is 15, another son, 13, Mark, who's the son we'll talk about. He's 10. And then my youngest is 7. And we also have 2 dogs, 3 cats, the whole family, the whole crew.
Isn't there a goldfish in there or something?
There is actually a goldfish. There was 2, and then some of them didn't make it, and now there's just one floating around.
Aw, poor guy. And of course, then there's wife, right? Let's not forget.
Oh yeah.
her.
The centerpiece of the family for sure.
Aw.
And then there's my kid's mom, who's a fantastic mother and advocate for our children, and we really are very much aligned on our best interest and needs for our children. So very blessed from a full holistic standpoint of everybody I'd consider a part of a family unit.
Yeah. And you're a nice guy, like I said.
Yeah, I try.
Yeah. It's all good. Just say thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, today, Matt, I know we're going to be talking about your son, Mark, and I've seen pictures of you and Mark together, both of you with your big smiles, and seems like regardless of what's going on with his journey, he's just a happy
Always.
kid and plugging along. So, Matt, tell us where it all started.
Yeah. So, Mark is, Mark's a very special child. He's had complications and challenges really since birth. He was born with a cleft lip and palate, which they found at like 20-week ultrasound. And then then they sent us for like an MRI, and at the 21, 22-week MRI, they identified that there was some like intracranial brain hemorrhaging going on, which normally the level they put it at a level 1, which like level 1, they don't always pick that up in utero because they're not doing MRIs on babies like in utero a lot. So it's could be more common than it is. They don't know, but they identified it. So we had to monitor that all through the pregnancy to make sure that it didn't elevate to like a level 2 or 3, which would have been more severe. Fortunately, it didn't. But when he was born, he did have a cleft lip, and what we weren't sure about was the palate, but the palate was definitely cleft as well. Spent a couple days in the NICU, and then the NICU physician who was tremendous identified that there might be something going on and ran genetic testing. And what came back was that he has like he has a partial deletion of his 21 chromosome. So 21q partial monosomy syndrome is what it's labeled as. And then on his 22 chromosome, he has a partial addition. So he's got an extra 22 chromosome. So that's 22q partial trisomy syndrome. So with that in conjunction, in the way my understanding, and not as a medical professional, as a parent, is that where the additions and deletions are like so unique that there isn't really a database of children like Mark. We went to our city's top genetic counselor, and unfortunately the feedback was there's nothing in our database, and so we're just going to have to see.
And Matt, he had that genetic testing right after he was born or further down the road?
No, like pretty much like his first couple of days of life when he was in the NICU, we ran the genetic tests on him, got that back, and then probably like maybe 6 months or a couple of months after, we went down to meet with the genetic counselor. And actually, I'll never forget, it was very frustrating. We got down there about a half hour early for our appointment. We were in the lobby waiting for an hour longer than we were expecting. So then I started just asking like, what's going on? And they moved us into like a room, which I I jokingly said, like, they could tell I was getting a little frustrated. So they put us in solitary confinement for another hour.
What does that mean?
That means they took us out of the lobby where I was starting to question why it's taking so long. And they put us in like a patient room, like an empty attending physician room by ourselves for another hour while they, I guess, caught up to their workload.
Oh man.
And then I started wandering the halls, and then people finally then our counselor finally came in. But they were in there for like 5 minutes, and they were like, yeah, there's no one like him. We don't know anything. He's kind of like an N of 1. So we'll just have to see. And like they started to walk the door, and I was like, no, you don't. I was like, I have questions.
Yeah. What kind of questions did you ask?
Well, I just said, like, look, I was like, I'm not going to hold you accountable because I know you don't know, but like, can you give me some kind of range or a baseline of like, what could we expect for his development, any conditions, etc. And that she didn't really have much, but she said he could have a reading delay and a speech delay, or he could be 25 years old in a burning building that's on fire and not realize he needs to get out. Like, we don't know. We're not going to know. We're just going to have to progress and see. There's no one with his medical history that we can use as a frame of reference. So that was our first really undiagnosis with Mark.
So you weren't really sure then at that point what this mutation really meant and what body systems it might affect, how to even help him along developmentally. So you're really up in the air at this point as to what to do. So he's how old at this point? He's a baby still, right?
Couple months, 6 months maybe. Like we had no sense really. I mean, we started to get a little bit of a sense when there were certain developmental milestones that he wasn't he hit some of the early ones, but there were a few that he was missing. He's very severely delayed even today with speech, but his mobility, he was like not really, he wasn't walking. He had low tone, they were saying, so he wasn't like walking when other kids start walking.
Uh-huh.
And
Low tone meaning muscle tone?
yeah, like he didn't really walk until he was about 2 years old, maybe a little 2.5. Like he was definitely behind on that. He was crawling for a bit in that period, but you could just tell he was obviously behind those milestones.
Mm.
Speech was always, and speech is something because of his cleft lip palate. He's had a pretty significant speech delay where he was virtually unable to really say much other than like M words like mom, never.
Just liked his mom best or better.
Yeah, hey, it could have been the case. I mean, at the time uh, she was, I was working, she was staying at home with him, and she was putting a lot of time into him. Thankfully, she was able to, so could have been the case, but to this day, like, he still can't really do D's very well. So when he was around 3 or 4, I stopped really trying to get him to call me dad or daddy, because he did start to develop the ability to say P's.
Mm.
So he we he switched he on his own switched to calling me papa, and that is what I am to this day to him.
Oh,
Papa, papa, papa,
that
papa.
that's
So
so
I love it.
sweet. Now, what's happening in the meantime then, Matt, with the development of the cleft palate and cleft lip?
Yeah.
What's happening in the meantime? What's going on as you're kind of just sitting back watching this happen and
Yeah, I mean,
waiting to see what's next?
so we lined up with the plastic teams, and they corrected his palate, they corrected his lip. They came they they the plastic surgeon at the hospital we went to was just phenomenal. Like, it was truly like work of art. And at during all that, there's other things that are now bubbling up, like because of his cleft lip and palate, he was never really able to be bottle fed well. So he had an NG tube going for a long for
Uh-huh.
first 6 months, but that getting that running it through for him, he was like very just he'd pull it out as a baby. So we made the decision to switch to a G tube. So he has like the G tube button now. And even to this day, he's still getting the primary nutrition comes from, he gets about 6 cans of Pediasure a day through through his G tube. The we've done speech clinics, we've done feeding clinics. He had a couple of years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, he had PFF surgery. It's like posterior flap surgery, where essentially like they had to like kind of seal up, I think, forget exactly what it was, but like they essentially like sealed up a bit of the back of his throat or his palate, because there was a big like hole between his like nasal and
Mm.
his oral passages, and it was causing feeding and swallowing issues and apnea type things. But through it all, he's been the happiest kid you'll ever meet. Like, there's nursing teams at the hospital we go to where when they hear that he checked in, these nurses might not even be assigned to him. They come running down the floor because they want to see him. Like, they just love.
Aw. He's
He,
a little charmer, I'm guessing.
he is just like, he's just so sweet. Like, I'd say from a developmental standpoint, he's made a ton of progress from speech and behavior, behavioral. emotional. He's kind of like he's probably developmentally on par with like maybe a 2 or 3-year-old,
And
right?
I'm sorry, he's how old again?
Well, so he's 10, but
Okay.
he's probably, in some ways, he's a little more advanced. But I think on aggregate, he's about a developmentally on par between like a 2 and 3-year-old.
Mhm. So are the
So
doctors saying that that's attributed to his gene mutation at this point, or is there something
yeah,
else?
well, it's they're not really saying it's attributed to it. It's just he has a he has what's called, they're calling it originally it was a global developmental delay, and now it's considered like a mild intellectual delay with a significant speech delay. They're
Mm.
not saying what it's really attributed to directly, but whenever they're mentioning what the whenever they're mentioning what the the running down his issues, they always start with his genetic issues, with his translocations, and then they then they lead into that. So it's
Mhm.
kind of alluding to it.
At this point, is he in school or a special program? Where is
Yeah.
he at this point?
Yep. No, I mean, no, he's so we got him into like the early intervention, like almost almost right away when he was very young. He's going to his mainstream school. He's got services that are provided to him through the school district. He's in breakout classes. He's got a pretty significant IEP, and he has like a one-on-one care while he's in school. He goes to his special breakout, like he starts his day with his regular class and then goes to his special breakouts, comes back for like the special activities like gym and whatnot. There's other services that he's qualified for where he'll have like a BSc and like a TSA, I think, or so, which is like a whole nother care team that kind of has come in and provided a lot of behavioral and
Mm.
emotional support for his development.
What's his favorite class?
So he loves art. He loves art, right? I think it's a combination between like art and gym, right? Like he loves doing the physical stuff, even if he's not really like competing, right, at a high level. But he's very artistic in that way, and he just gets so proud when he comes home and I mean, even the early stuff when it was just like you could tell he just like sloshed paint on a page, right? He was just so happy to go, Papa, Papa, look, Papa.
Aw,
So
aw,
it's definitely the one that I think he takes the most enjoyment out of and pride
yeah.
in it.
Aw,
And
that's
we do a
very
lot of
cool.
it. We do a lot of it home with him. So yeah.
With the developmental milestone issues, et cetera, that you've had with him and that journey, as I understand it, Matt, some other interesting symptoms came along, and this is what you're looking to get
Yeah.
some answers for. So
Yep.
talk about that.
I mean, it's not even that long ago. September of last year, they were at their mother's house, and she notified me that he had a bloody nose that wouldn't stop. She was trying to get it to stop. It had gone on for almost a half hour, and at one point he lost consciousness, and
Mm.
which obviously would panic anybody. So she called 911. Mm, The ambulatory team came, picked him, got him, took him down to our the children's hospital in our area where he was admitted almost right away. I went she was in the ambulance with him, and his brother stayed with one of their grandmothers, and then I went down to the hospital to meet him there. So we all got there. We all got there at around the same time. And I wasn't really sure like what was going on because then nobody was, but like when when they were taking him out of the ambulance, he seemed like in somewhat good spirits. Like first thing he said to me was like, "Almost Halloween, Papa," which like because it was close to
Aw,
Halloween. I think
okay.
he was kind of elaborating on that topic for a while. So we get him into the hospital. They admit him, And then while they ran some tests, and one of the things that came back was that his platelet counts were really low and his hemoglobin levels were really low. But he also had like a really high resicclotite count, which the mixture of those numbers weren't telling they weren't telling a clear story. So they brought in the hematology team, which essentially ended up taking over from that point. He was in the hospital for a week from the time he was admitted, and there was a lot of testing being ran. He got multiple platelet and red blood cell transfusions, and then they did a bone marrow biopsy, and that is where they uncovered that the cells in his bone marrow are like, in some ways, only like 10 to 50, between 50 and 10% of what they should be in a lot of areas. So there was like there was definitely concern there. And then, and that has really started the journey that we've been on since then. None of this was on our radar as a potential issue, but since then, like he's had a few other nose bleeding incidents. He's probably been hospitalized since September about 6 or 7 times.
Oh boy.
Each time is usually for at least 5-6 days, because they get him in, they get his levels right. The other thing that we battle too is that we have to try to keep him healthy and virus free. During the first visit to the hospital, he had like the flu or a virus of some kind, right? Suppresses his bone marrow. He also, because of his cleft lip and palate and this other like nasal thing, like the pipes in his nose don't work the same way. So he can't blow his nose as easily as you or I could. He can't do it. So there tends to be a lot of agitation as he tries to like clear his nasal passages. And what we've seen is a lot of times now they can lead to a nosebleed, which then doesn't stop, right? Get low. But like what we found out over the first couple of months was that every time we were trying to get like an accurate read on what his counts were post a transfusion to see like where things were, he had a virus, he had the flu, he had mono, he had like all these things that kept clouding the view of what his actual cell levels should be doing and what his actual platelets and hemoglobin should be doing.
So what physicians are on his team right now?
I mean,
Kind of doctors, yeah.
specifically for this is he's working with the hematology team primarily. We had to loop in a GI team because his hemoglobin kept dropping and we couldn't figure out why. And there didn't seem to really be anything that there was like, we thought maybe there was like an internal bleed around somewhere in his G-tube site that might have been like just slowly bleeding a little and it lowers it. So we brought GI in and they actually found a polyp in his butt that was about pretty inflamed. They assured us nothing to be worried about there. Kids get these all the time. They're not cancer. So they had to remove that recently to go. But like we ended up getting a lot of testing done over the first couple of weeks and months after this. And they were testing for things like leukemia and other types of like rare cancers. And then other hematological conditions. And they pretty much ruled out all the stuff that they were looking for.
Hmm.
So, which then left us in a spot of there's something going on with his bone marrow affecting his platelet production and possibly his hemoglobin. But we don't know exactly what it is. We don't know what it didn't line up with like aplastic anemia because his levels were typically higher than what someone classified with aplastic anemia would have. Like his platelets tend to hover right now around a 20 or 30,000. The concern is that he's shown no ability to stop a bleed at 20 or 30,000 platelets. Like the last time a nosebleed that hospitalized him, his platelets were around 25,000, which they typically don't want to do a lot of stuff unless they drop down to like 10 is kind of like the scary point. But
Is that how this manifests through a nosebleed typically?
well, I
Is
mean,
that hard? There's something going on.
well, no. So like the nosebleed, so like you can tell when his hemoglobin's low because he gets like diaphoretic and like real like winded and out of breath running around. The nosebleed tends to indicate that his platelet levels are low because he's not able to clot it and stop it, right? What we're told is that at 20,000, he should be able to stop a nosebleed, but he has not been able to stop a nosebleed at 30,000.
Hmm.
So we're kind of, so like they haven't been able to classify it as aplastic anemia, right? Because you need to, the levels, your counts need to be significantly lower for them, for it to match that criteria. And I mean, the closest we got to a diagnosis was like idiopathic. Well, actually, no. We asked about, could it be like idiopathic thrombocytopenia? And
Hmm. Is that
I mean,
something that you had researched, or is that something
yeah,
that
I
you
mean,
passed out?
ITP is essentially like an unknown. It's so idiopathic thrombocytopenia purpura is like an autoimmune disease, right?
Hmm.
That has low platelets. So it's not ITP, which would be like immune thrombocytopenia purpura, but it is what they've basically called it is idiopathic thrombocytopenia, which is an unidentified cause of low platelets. I'm like,
Mhm.
frustrating thing is like, yeah, no kidding. We
Well,
we know they're low.
idiopathic anything is frustrating because you
Yeah.
have no answers as to where it starts and what's causing it. So what's on the list next steps, or is that where things have stopped with this diagnosis?
No, I mean, because like that's not even an official diagnosis. That was
Mhm.
me. I tend to press the medical professional to give me something. Like
Mhm.
I know I it's not that I want to hold them necessarily accountable, but I'm like you have a lot of education and experience around this. I'm sure your gut is telling you something. Like share that with me, and I just so that I can kind of put my head where your head's at. Like,
Yeah. How do
and
you how do you get move through that process of pushing the physicians to dig for more? What's that experience
I
like?
mean, it depends. It really depends, I think, on the relationship that with the physician, their experience or motivation. Like the thing I will say about Mark's hematologist is I really feel like this doctor really is fighting for Mark and really cares
Mm.
about him and wants to resolve it and figure it out. He's also very like there is a scientific process that has to be followed around this, and I respect that, but Like his communication, like as soon as we get lab results, he's on the phone with us, talking it through, giving us his thoughts. He fields questions, no matter how out there and obscure they might be, like asking like, should we be giving him like, should we be giving him this? Should we be not giving him that? Could it be this or that? And like, as a medical professional, he probably, I think a lot of times as a parent, sometimes you ask these questions and the doctors kind of like roll their eyes, or they're like, this is all right, Google dad or Google mom. And it's like, I never get that feeling from him. He's always very willing to answer a question. So he has done a fantastic job with this.
Have you felt that way with other doctors? So maybe feeling,
No,
I use the word dismissed, but how would you describe it?
I mean, there's been other scenarios with Mark where we're like fighting to get him, seen, fighting to get him, like fighting for like, one of the things, he doesn't fit the classical mold of autism, right? And for years there was a lot of services and benefits that he did not have access to because he didn't have an autism diagnosis. And that was a challenge for us. So we met with developmental pediatrics, and they were really unsure at the time about he, like the argument is he's so social. Like he'll go up to anybody and say hi and hug them and wants to tell them everything about what's going on. That they're like, the argument was like, he's too social to be autistic in this case.
Oh,
But
interesting.
then we got a second opinion, and they had said, yeah, he might be social, but it's not the right kind of social. Like he's not going up and holding a real back and forth conversation. He'll go up and he'll show you what's in his hand or tell you what he wants to do or ask about the vacuum. And you might try to ask him another question and he just repeats the vacuum thing. So he's got a high energy, but the social ability that he needed isn't there. So
it's not a conversation or an exchange.
it wasn't like a direct conversation. And so then we were able to go back and really kind of advocate, like you're saying that he's not autistic, but he's also not autistic. Like he's got to be it's a spectrum. He's got to be somewhere on there because of how he communicates and what his social ability is. And it ended up getting approved that he has a mild autism diagnosis now. So he's able to get a lot of the therapies that were closed off to him prior, just because he didn't have it. So, I mean, that was like frustrating, but positive outcome that we've had.
How did you find those resources or learn about those resources from the autism standpoint?
So actually the rest of his care team, like the non-physician care team, so his BSc, his TSA,
what does that mean, Matt? Who are those?
It's like a behavioral specialist counselor, or like a behavioral services counselor. And they came to us through a state sponsored behavioral group. It's one of the services the state provided. And we've worked with them for years, since he was a baby. So his BSc at the time was a huge advocate for him, and really worked hand in hand with us to, ensure the therapy, treatment plan that we were trying to execute was being done across all settings, right? So my house, their mom's house, the school. But then at the same time, she ended up really becoming a big advocate for him, and was able to had access to research we didn't have, was putting us in touch with other people to talk to get language or second opinions. So that was a huge resource and asset.
So where are the doctors now in terms of where they think this genetic mutation fits into the scheme of everything that's going on with Mark?
Yeah, so actually, it was pretty interesting. The hematologist was looking at his genetic layout or like mutation, and he said that there is he doesn't know for sure, but based on where I think deletion is in chromosome 22, it was right by it was right near like a gene or a cell or whatever. I don't know exactly. That could lead to could indicate like low platelet production or something.
Hmm.
But it didn't really that then they ran like a pretty broad genetic test on him for a variety of things, and like nothing really came back. Like we didn't really get any hits. Like what it did was it ruled out some of the more rare conditions. There's like Fanconi and like a few others that it ruled out. Really though, I mean what we've been doing is kind of monitoring and trying to maintain certain levels for him. So like once a week, we're now taking him to get blood work done. They
Hmm.
check his levels. Depending on where they're at, if they're in a healthy or safe space, then he's fine to go home. If he needs a transfusion though, we're getting a transfusion that week. So we're averaging about a transfusion every 2 to 3 weeks at this point.
Oh, wow.
So it's like blood work. And really what's breaking my heart is just he's really starting to get uncomfortable with the needles, the amount of needles. I mean, I used to joke around. He got needles so infrequently before that he would get excited for them. So we'd be driving to the doctors. He'd be like, needle, Papa, needle, needle.
Ah.
Right. And like, he'd get a little scared when it came out, but then he'd be done and he was fine. But now he's getting stuck every week.
Hmm.
Sometimes if they don't get a good line or they don't get a good stick, they got to take it out and do it again. And an IV stick is a lot different than just a blood draw stick. So like,
Yeah. How do you explain to him what's going on because of the developmental level that he's at?
I mean, it's hard because he's not always focused on your explanation. Like when you're taking him to the doctors for blood work, like he's like pretty happy and jolly on the way in. But once he gets in the chair and they start getting him prepped, he starts to get panicky. And at that point, it's like, you can't, it's hard to calm him down. I mean, now we're at a point where like, just need to get a couple nurses that hold him down, and I or their mom will hold him, and then they get in, they get out, and they move on.
Uh-huh.
And really, once it's done, he's like happy. He's back to normal. He's wants to know like, what are we gonna like? Can we go play now? Like, but there's not much that you can really do to kind of talk him through it because like it's like even if you had sat down, had a long conversation with him, he he wouldn't retain all the info the same way.
Uh-huh.
Not worthwhile to do. And I do sit down
Sure.
and he knows like he's in trouble for something. I will sit down with him and like have a serious talk. And I'm like, do you
Uh-huh.
understand what I'm saying, Mark? And yes. And but
Ah.
but as soon as like you are done that, he'll be like, Papa play. Like like
Uh-huh.
got
Yeah.
he's got his little one track mind that he's thinking of, but
It's a
yeah.
lot, Matt, especially with a big family and all the responsibility. And how would you speak to how this has affected your family? And how do you cope with this little guy and all he's got going on?
Yeah, I mean, I try not to think too much about like all the other stuff Mark has going on as like anything other than just like this is Mark. Like there's no perfect, there's no right, there's no wrong. Like this is him. And like there's no regret. Like there's no, there's no lamenting like a different version of Mark. Like this is him. And honestly, he's a blessing. What has been challenging is with this new bone marrow issues that we're facing and the bleeding concerns and the blood levels. Like it is a very traumatic experience for Mark when he goes into the hospital with a bleed that won't stop. It's a very traumatic experience for all of us to witness it. It's traumatic for his younger brother who doesn't quite like, I mean, it's like his younger brothers asked me in the past, like, is Mark going to die? And I'm like, it's a good question to ask. And you should be, you're definitely allowed to ask it, but we're all going to die someday, buddy. I don't know. Like, is Mark dying right now? No, we don't think so. The doctors are working to take care of him and everybody is making sure he's safe and healthy. But it breaks your heart when your kid asks that because they don't know. They're coming from a place of fear and innocence, right? So
that's a hard question to try to answer. And then you go to bed and what do you think about it at night, Matt?
I mean, look, as a parent, it is very easy to go to the darkest place in your mind about what's going on with your kid, what could happen, how would you feel if it did happen? Like, and every time I get like a negative thought, like, what happens? Like, could he die? Can he die from this? Theoretically, yes, but is he there now? No. So like, I'm kind of like conditioning my brain, but like when I start thinking negative, I will like look at happy, smiling moments with Mark on my phone, or I'll think of something because he is so positive through it all. Like I keep telling myself, like, who am I to not take his attitude through this as like an example to follow, right? Like, who am I to ignore where
He's
his
your role
emotions?
model. Yeah, he's your role model, your hero.
Yeah, and he should
Your
be.
hero. And you're his hero, yeah.
So
So what's next for him? What's next steps for you to figure out what's going on?
So really the treatment options that we've been presented as like the main treatment options are would likely need a bone marrow transplant at some point, which has its concerning, like it not just like, it's not a neat, super easy procedure. And there's risks involved. The other potential option would be like immune therapy, immune suppression therapy, which my understanding is he's given drugs that would essentially eradicate his immune system. And then for a period of time, and then he's given drugs that would help rebuild it from scratch. My concern there is that Mark is the kind of child that if he's walking in the street, he will pick gum up off the ground and chew it, not really even tell you, just, oh, gum. And that he's sick. He's constantly dealing with a cold or a sniffly nose or something like just that because of his self-care abilities. So there's a little bit of concern about that also. Those are the two options that we've kind of been presented with. Did get, and our hematologist did do a lot of the legwork for us with insurance so that like we can start we could start looking for bone marrow transplant donors. They did find a few, like what's considered a perfect match. I think they found 12 in the database that match. And then 12, there's about maybe 2 or 3 that are considered a perfect match. So obviously you got to make sure they're still willing to donate. But prior to that, we had blood work done on his brother because apparently your sibling is your best potential match.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah. So, and then really before they do any of that, which could still be another 6 to 8 months out, their mom and I actually have to go soon and get genetic testing done because what the doctor wants to do is run essentially identify if there's any genetic markers in us that would lead to a higher risk of bone marrow transplant failure or rejection. And apparently they can uncover that by doing a really broad, a really wide genetic profile on both of us.
Interesting. Have you had any difficulty with getting genetic testing approved?
No, I mean, not in getting it approved. Like the doctors absolutely will do it. Or I mean, like the teams will do it. It just all has to go through insurance, right? It has to get approved. And that's where I think our doctor has been a great advocate for us because he knows exactly what to say to get it approved. He's not lying. Like if I were to call up and to try to deal with the insurance company and be like, my kid needs a genetic test, I wouldn't be able to speak to it in a way. Whereas our doctors, he's been fantastic about that. We haven't
Yeah, or he's making the case for you.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. So, Matt, what would you say you've learned about the healthcare system from this process?
I mean, I think like my biggest frustration with just the whole healthcare process is like, I think there's like, there's no accountability to actually provide answers, it feels like. And I get that. And I know where that comes from in that, like, all the malpractice that has happened over the years and the lawsuits and absolutely a doctor doesn't want to say, well, it could be this. And then it's not, and something else happens. And then but I think there needs to be some kind of agreements. I would sign an agreement for a doctor to just speak freely to me.
Mm.
What are you thinking? What do you I won't hold you accountable, but give me some things that I can just read up on to bring myself more up to speed. Like it's very frustrating when there's something wrong, you don't know what it is, and all they're doing is checking the what's his current status now? Do we need to do something right now? Is his platelets low now? No? Okay, then he's fine. You can go. And it's like, but I still like what I like. It's like when you do that for months and you don't know what the heck it could be causing, what they're checking for, it's frustrating. It really
Yeah,
is.
limbo is a hard place to be, and you've been there for a while now. If the healthcare system adopted what it is you're suggesting in terms of being able to have a very open conversation, how would that change your journey thus far and going forward?
Well, I mean, so you're told what are the symptoms of something that's unknown, right? Like we don't know what it is, but these are the symptoms that your child's experiencing. Come see us in a week. And now you're looking up all the symptoms, right? And it's just freaking you out. Like, I think that the amount of emotional trauma that people inflict on themselves with unknown diagnoses or medical issues, it's not all about knowing definitively like 2 or 3 potential outcomes it could be. It's not knowing anything and then doing your own crazy research it's not that the research is crazy, but there's just so much out there that links to so many other things, and you can really drive yourself nuts. Like trying to wait a minute, okay, hold on. He has this, and now that says it could be this kind of cancer, which kills him in 3 months. What's going on? Like you can really scare yourself silly and with without any kind of real frame of reference, just trying to research on symptoms. So, if I could sign something and the doctor could just be like, look, I definitely don't think it's these couple of things. These are the 3 things I'm looking into. You might want to read up on yourself. Can't say it's any one of them, but I I feel like I have enough of a understanding of what's going on with your son that these are the ones that I want to look into more.
Mm-hmm.
That would be awesome. That would be like a really educational. I feel like it'd be like a partnership dynamic between you and the doctor. But as a parent, you'd have to be willing to mitigate or own some of the risk of the doctor. Like, you'd have to free the doctor of the risk of, like, well, if there's one thing in there that I said that wasn't 100% accurate, now my entire practice or livelihood's at risk. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
that's why they guard themselves. I get it. But like, there should be an option for people to kind of waive that for a more transparent conversation.
Yeah. Sounds like the bottom line for you is you're looking for collaboration with your son's physicians.
Mhm.
What would you, Matt, if there were other parents in your position who got to the point of bringing in their child with this list of symptoms and going months without answers, what would you suggest to them? What would you advise them to do and how to manage through the system to get answers?
Yeah, I mean, it's different for a lot of people. We're lucky. We're in an area where we have some of the best medical care in the world. If you're in a more rural area, you might have to travel to one of these markets that has a top tier physician team. That could be challenging, especially depending on like what kind of insurance you have. And so there's a ton. I would say, if like, what I think's been really helpful for us is that, like, we found a physician that cares about our son. Like, he truly cares about our son. To be honest, he's not the most, like, he's a pretty young doctor. Like, he's not like
Mhm.
like, he's published all over. Like, he's very successful, but he's a younger doctor. There's older people in the hematology team at his hospital that I guarantee we would not have had as good of an experience with, because of just their tenure there, their bedside manner, their variety of those reasons. I would say, if you don't feel like the team or the doctor that you're working with passionately cares about the health and welfare of your child, you'll do better finding a doctor maybe less credentialed, but more compassionate to work through and talk through with you. And I mean, we're lucky our doctor's well credentialed and compassionate. But
Mhm.
I would take, I mean, yeah, I would take a more empathetic doctor than a more established but less collaborative or compassionate.
Mhm. So empathy, compassion is more important for you at this
Yeah,
point.
as a parent, I mean, watching your kid go through something that nobody, even the top medical minds in the field, don't really have an answer for, like, someone's got to be understanding to that, right?
Mhm.
Doctor.
What's an example of how your physician, your hematologist has demonstrated that?
I mean, like, so we get blood work every week, right? And I mean, not 2 minutes before we get the notification on our phones or in our email that the results are back, both our phones are ringing from the doctor calling to talk it through with us. You
Wow.
know, uh, he always he always gives us time. Oh, anything you've read, anything you've learned that you want to talk about. I mean, I've gone down some rabbit holes, right? And it's real easy to go down. And I've brought up things that it could be, it couldn't be, and that he's never made me feel like I was some wild conspiracy parent trying to thinking I'm smarter than the doctors. Like, he's always had a very evidence-based and research-based discussion around everything and again, I'm not pointing the fingers anywhere, but I am just like, I'm looking for anything to try to get some answers. And he's never made me feel bad about anything that I've come across and asking about it. And so that's really, to me, that's next level, because a lot of
Mhm.
doctors don't have to. I've brought things up to doctors in the past And they're like, no, there's research around it that says that. And I'm like, my first question is always, yeah, how many people were included in that research that have the same genetic history as my son? Because my argument would probably be 0. So how do you know everything that you're telling me, which was researched, is okay for Mark? It might be okay for my other sons, my daughter, because they have a more normal genetic makeup. But Mark, how many were like him in that study? And then it's just, it's been really a great experience though, with working with our hematologist. He's done a
Are
great
there
job.
any silver linings here for you, Matt?
I mean, silver lining is there's nothing will stop you in your tracks as a parent more than the fear of something being wrong with a child. And I think when everything is kind of okay as families, especially big families, but it's just, we all have our little lives that we're managing on top of the rest of the people that are in our lives. And it's like things can be busy with me or my wife, or our daughter has a lot going on with college, or our our high school sons are busy with that stuff, and you just get into like a everyday flow of life. But then when something like this kind of presents itself, you have to pump the brakes, and you do spend a lot of time reflecting on what's important, what gets you through these things. And it's it brings everybody, I think it has brought everybody closer in terms of like a concerned, focused effort on Mark and his care. It's reinforced that me and their mother are both truly like a good co-parenting team, united for his best interest. So those are some silver linings, I guess. It's
Mhm.
it it makes you pump the brakes and kind of appreciate everyone around you a little bit more. And it certainly made me appreciate Mark and everything, that how brave and how strong and how resilient this medically fragile and challenging child is. He's one of the strongest and most beautiful and just inspiring people I've ever met. And I just can't believe he's my son.
Aw. Well, yes, these things do give you perspective in terms of what's important, and I think you figure that out, and I'm sure he would have wonderful things to say about his super dad too. What do you wish for him, Matt?
For Mark, I mean, I just wish for him to just be happy. I mean, it's not there for any of my kids, right? Like, I wish that he didn't have to normalize his medical challenges in his own mind. Like, it's normal for him to have to get blood work. He doesn't like it, but it's normal. Like, I wish that didn't have to be normal for him.
Mm.
Brother, his other siblings, like they go for blood work once a year, right? And Mark's gone every week, at least once a week, sometimes more. So I I just want him to be happy.
Yeah.
I want him to be happy. I want him to be healthy, and that's it. That's all. That's all you can ask for as a parent. Everything else is out of your hands.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty basic, but pretty significant at the same time. So, Matt, thank you so much for
Pleasure.
talking us through Mark's story. And I'm hoping that maybe we could get a follow up from you at some point with regard to what you make decide with his treatment, or how the genetic testing process goes. If you're going that route, we'd love to have you back.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll keep you posted. And just credit to you. I really appreciate you following up with me and checking in on him. Like, it just means a lot. It's nice to know people out there care about his well-being. I actually have a couple of clients that I work with that just because there was a couple periods of time where I was out of work while taking care of it, like in the hospital with him. The info just kind of came to them like, yeah, my son's dealing with something. And we've just been like, I mean, it's beyond like a work relationship, right? And it makes you feel just a little less alone in the process.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a huge reflection on you, Matt, in terms of how you treat people. And he is a product of you. And so I'm sure he's an amazing kid. Like I said, I've only seen pictures, but he seems like a pretty amazing little guy. So thank you for that, Matt. And I'll hope to bring you back on again.
Be great. Thanks so
All
much.
right.
Lil.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. Oh my goodness, that's a wrap on another compelling story. Thanks for listening to the Desperate for a Diagnosis podcast. If you would like more information about today's guests or to find out more about Laura, me, go to DesperateForADiagnosis.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also follow show updates and healthcare news on the podcast's Facebook page. If you would like to be a guest on the show, or if you have any questions, advice, or suggestions for our guests, please email me at lauramarie@desperateforadiagnosis.com.